Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, my name is Helge Blakkesrud and I'm the head of the research group on Russia, Eurasia and the Arctic here at the Norwegian Institute of International Affairs. It's a great pleasure to welcome you to today's seminar, Ukraine in the World, and the public lecture by First Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, Ms. Nataliia Galibarenko. Ukraine has been going through momentous changes over the last year. The Euromaidan revolution, Crimea, the war in eastern Ukraine. And these momentous changes, of course, has also been reflected in a reorientation of Ukraine's foreign policy and relations with the outside world. We're therefore very happy and grateful that First Deputy Minister Galibarenko found the time during her visit here to Norway to share some of her reflections on Ukraine's current priorities in the field of foreign policy and on Ukraine's place in the world. After the presentation, there will be time for some questions and answers. But now, without further ado, I have the great pleasure to give the floor to First Deputy Minister Galibarenko. Please.
Thank you and good afternoon to everybody. It's a pleasure to meet with you. However, I will prefer that the reason for speaking about Ukraine was, of course, another one. It would have been a pleasure to come and speak about that we are having implemented reform agenda, that we are forwarding on our way to the European Union and about prosperity and welfare, but this is not the case, unfortunately now. So I'm forced, and this is also my commitment, to speak about also the dramatic events in Ukraine and also to show to you and to tell you about how we are trying, so to say, to marry war, reform agenda, and very dramatic economic situation in Ukraine. I was not actually preparing any written speech, just not to be boring and to make it like a live conversation with you. That's why I will be making a presentation dedicated to the main topics, which tells you about Ukraine, and then it would be like, as my colleague told you, a Q&A session. So we will be, I suppose, sharing also. I would be appreciating hearing your views, what you see and what you feel about Ukraine, because you know sometimes you really need a vision from the outside world just to understand and to see maybe another alternative vision of the situation. So, as my colleague also told you, during this 1 year, we experienced so many developments that it can be enough even for 10 years. We went through very tragic events at Maidan. We lost Crimea, and we also experienced Russian war on the east. But first, I would just like to start with the beginning, when everything was started, when our people were struggling at Maidan for their choice to decide their future and also for the European integration. They were struggling for the association agreement to be signed by the former president. During these days, Russia made a special operation of annexation of Crimea, and then all our attention was focused on the events in Kiev. Our former good neighbor was planning an annexation, and it is now confirmed. I would like to say that in the special movie dedicated to the anniversary of annexation of Crimea, President Putin made clear that then he realized that he's losing control over Ukraine. He decided with his military men and counselors to prepare a special operation how to annex Crimea and to make a separation. So this is also the confirmation of the so-called then referendum and the so-called free will and free decision of the people who are living on the Crimean Peninsula. You know that we lost Crimea without any bloodshed. And of course, from one side, it was a progressive move because we saved lives, because there was no violence. The second is that our military forces were not prepared to struggle and to fight for the territory. But Mr. Putin was so intoxicated by his victory in Crimea that he managed to seize the territory without any special constraints, that he decided to go further. And then he started his actions on the east of Ukraine. And I would like to express my point here that for Mr. Putin and the Russian power, this is not the question of whether they are taking Crimea, Lugansk, or Donetsk. This is not the matter of territory, of grasping another kilometers or some millions of population. This is the political leverage, how to punish Ukraine and how to dictate their own rules of the game. The idea was and is now to decide for Ukrainians. So we are suggested two options from the Russian side. One is to submit our policy to Moscow, and then we will be united in some kind of customs union. And the other option is that we would become a failed state by the hands of the Russian authorities. So how? Not only by annexation on the east and by regular Russian forces, but they are also using economy, energy as a leverage, how to actually disrupt the existing power in Ukraine and how to throw up the government, which is now in Kiev. But also very clear point that we were not from the very beginning expecting that there can be a military solution to this conflict. We are not that naive. Of course, the victory will be not on the side of Ukraine. And our President Poroshenko, since he was elected, made clear that he stands for peace. And he is a president who was elected because he promised Ukrainians that he will be bringing peace to their homes. And then we will stop paying human lives for Ukraine. That's why that was Minsk 1. Now we have Minsk 2. So every time we are trying to negotiate with Russians and have some kind of a compromise on the table, how to bring peace to Ukrainians. And now at this point, I will give you our overview and estimation of how we are now with the Minsk 2 arrangements. So the ceasefire, which was envisaged, is of course a good sign. So the number of shelling is decreased, and maybe for the first time during this conflict, we stopped losing human lives. With the withdrawal of weapons, the situation is not that positive and clear, because what separatists are doing, they are trying to move heavy weapons from one point to another. And also the OSCE monitoring mission, which is actually called to monitor and verify the withdrawal of heavy weapons, is forbidden for having a full access to the territory and verify and fix that the concrete weapon was withdrawn. There was also a point on the exchange of prisoners. And our formula was everyone for everyone. But again, Russians made clear their perception of this provision, because still we have political prisoners in Russia, and the most outrageous case is, of course, the case of Nadia Savchenko. She again restarted her hunger strike, and her physical state is really very, very hard and challenging, and our Ukrainian doctors, which were allowed to visit her, made clear that if she will be continuing a hunger strike, so they will be counting several weeks for her life. And this is the very disgusting things, because she is a member of the Parliament of Ukraine. She is a member of our parliamentary delegation to the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. We are engaging with the whole civilized world to make her free, but instead we are receiving empty words and commitments of the Russian authorities referring that they will consider this case in accordance with the Russian legislation. So even humanitarian reason is not enough for letting her free. The other point was OSCE monitoring mission that should verify and fix the ceasefire and withdrawal of troops. And here, as I mentioned, we have a problem with actually the access of the OSCE to all places to verify and fix the situation. Just also to give you a very simple fact to understand what is going on. We have a very big borderline with the Russian Federation. It's more than 1,000 kilometers. And the OSCE mission is allowed to be present only at 2 checkpoints. This is roughly 25 kilometers of the border. Of course, this is nothing. And we made clear from the very beginning that proper control over body is key to resolving the conflict. We are to stop penetrating terrorists from the Russian territory and, of course, to stop logistical support, because they are receiving weapon, goods, gasoline from the Russian Federation on a regular basis. It is already 18th humanitarian convoy which crossed our territory from the Russian Federation. So again, on a regular basis, they're being fed up by the Russians, and that's why they are proceeding with their aggressive actions. There was also a provision what to do also on the Ukrainian side, and among them were to have a special law on decentralization. So to give you simple understanding, this is to give like more competences in the local self-government for Donetsk and Lugansk regions. And it was also a commitment on constitutional reform. That's in fact how to reflect decentralization, and local elections. Just recently, our parliament passed the respective law, granting a special competences to the Donetsk and Lugansk region, but we made it clear that these competences and also the re-establishment of payment of social fares and salaries to the territories which are beyond our control, they will be implemented only after local elections, which should be held with accordance with the OSCE standards, according to our legislation, and under the OSCE supervision. And you know what a miracle? Russians immediately denied such approach and said that this is not stipulated in the Minsk deal. But I'm sorry, if local elections, which are free and fair on our mind, are not in the interest of the Russian Federation and the separatists, so their other idea is clear. So they want elections, like referendum in Crimea, to be made under the gun barrels, just to legitimize separatists, who will be the next day sitting opposite of Ukrainian authorities and dictating their rules. That will not go. They will not fly, as I say. So that is where we are with the Minsk deal and the implementation. And conclusion is also clear. So the deal is good and is comprehensive, but it should be properly implemented. That was the problem for the Minsk I. This is the problem for the Minsk II. So proper implementation is crucial, and that's why we do see reasons why it is not implemented, as I described to you. So we decided also to invite a peacekeeping operation to Ukraine. And here, our approach is quite, I think, flexible. We made a special appeal to the European Union also and to the United Nations, requesting to consider our request for the peacekeeping operation on our territory. So for the time being, the request is already submitted. We will be ready to discuss during expert consultations the modalities of the concrete mission. Let me be clear that we do expect that Russia will be using its veto right in the UN. But again, this is the question of political responsibility also before the world. So to say clearly and publicly why Russian Federation is against any peacekeeping operation, which, in our view, would be deployed, should be deployed on the territory of Ukraine just in order to implement Minsk deal and in order to prevent separatists from penetrating in depth into our territory. That is the point. This is not something new. This is just a way of how to implement Minsk deal. That is the rationale behind it. Of course, this is the situation like on the ground, and logical question is what can be the solution? And here, as I mentioned, we see a combination. So combination, this is diplomatic efforts, this is support of Ukraine, and this is sanctions against Russian Federation and possible peacekeeping operation. So we are ready to implement Minsk deal. We are ready to have a peacekeeping operation which will be enforcing some Minsk deal provisions. And of course, we expect, and we now receive technical, humanitarian, and financial support from the European Union, and especially from Norway, which I am of the special gratitude. And I also mentioned sanctions, and there I will stop a little bit, because also to explain that we do not see these sanctions as a special punishment. This is more a mechanism of deterring, also showing that behavior of a state in the 21st century, then it is in order just to dictate its conditions and its demand to another state. It's just cross the border, grasp the piece of the territory, and trying to speculate on this. So again, this is not a punishment. This is a deterrence, and also showing that such behavior would not be tolerated, because the aggressor should be punished in some way or another. We as Ukrainians, we are standing on our territory and we are defending our sovereignty, doing what we can, trying also to equip our army as we can, to modernize it, because this is not a secret that we were not prepared. For all these years, our army was underfinanced, understaffed, and that was, of course, a consequences that we were not prepared actually to counter properly the Russian aggression. But you know, after 1 year, we grasp ourselves, and we also, with the help of volunteers, international community, we are now able to stand and to defend our territory. But again, the logic is that we are not going to lose the lives of our people just for saving territory. We are defending our country. The issue whether the state will exist or not is on the table. And I'm not exaggerating, of course. Again, after all agreements and negotiations, it is not excluded that Russians at some point they will be restarting offensive again. So we should be also prepared for this scenario, and that's why we decided that the 5% of the GDP this year will be going for the needs of the military personnel. This is on the ground about war, and I will maybe shortly also tell you about the reform agenda. Of course, this is the main challenge, how to do and implement reforms. Then you are obviously in a lack of money because of the war, obviously in a lack of security guarantees, obviously in a lack of public support, because people are tired, frightened, struggled for their life every day, and especially after new austerity measures which we were forced to adopt in order to have a credit from the International Monetary Fund. Of course, they made a very negative impact on the public support for the government and for the reform agenda. We haven't another alternative. This is the point. That's why we are also trying to tell to people honestly, without making any promises about good future that Ukraine will be successful in 1 year or two. That will not be the case, obviously. But our message is, if we would be strong enough and we will be trying to save money and to use austerity measures during this year and maybe the forthcoming 1 or 2 years, so it will give us a possibility to balance the economy, stabilize the budget, and then it would be a ground for the economy and investment, of course, if the war would be finished. So the main package of reforms include, of course, anti-corruption. We passed a very strong bunch of legislation pieces aimed at struggling corruption. We also established anti-corruption bureau, and the head of this bureau, who will be absolutely independent from the government, and the president will be nominated soon. But of course, the main challenge is the implementation of this legislation, and we will be trying also to give up with the corrupted past and to have a new legacy. This is also dictated by the interest of the Western companies which are operating on the territory of Ukraine, because it's not a secret that many of them are not afraid of war. They're afraid of not very conducive environment, including legislative, bureaucratic procedures, and of course, corruption. Next is, of course, the judiciary reform. This is also like our reply to what people expressed at Maidan, because for all these years, the trial system was the most corrupted in Ukraine. And Ukrainians have never believed in trials, because they knew that in order to secure some decision in the trial, you are to be financially capable to buy it. So we are also to stop this disgusting practice. That's why we are also passed a law which will be directed at enhancing the responsibility of judges, and so they would be more responsible before the civil society and before the government. We also initiated a so-called deregulation reform. So we are decreasing a number of taxes, and we are also trying to have some e-government procedures and practices while we are accumulating taxes. And closely connected decentralization reform, which I mentioned in the very beginning. So the idea is to start with budgetary decentralization, so giving to the regions a possibility to collect certain taxes. And these taxes, they will be streamlined in their local budgets instead of going to Kiev. But more comprehensive decentralization requires, of course, amendments to the constitution, and it would be made through the special constitutional commission in order to prepare these amendments, them to the parliament, and to be passed respectively. Just maybe 2 words about European integration, and I will be stopping here. Why European integration? Because, you know, there in Norway, during my meetings, I felt, of course, a very good advice proceeding from the experience that your country is having with the European Union. So to be outside the European Union, but to be that flexible and that modernized, also that to accept certain rules, the best practices of the European Union. So to be cooperated as much as possible, but not within the format of the European Union as such. But, you know, for us, for our population, this is not the case, at least now, because we were struggling so much for the European choice. And now all forces should be focused also on this track. This is the path which will show Ukrainians that they are doing and they are making sacrifices in order to have something in the future. The Riga summit will be coming in May, and of course we have high expectations. But the main point is that we will be expecting a political signal on the possibility to grant Ukrainians a visa-free regime for short-term trips. We are proceeding with a special technical procedures now, and the mission of EU experts came last week to Ukraine to see how we are proceeding with the reforms of the law enforcement bodies, what is the situation with biometric passports. So this work is in the pipeline. But again, my message is that also in the view of solidarity with Ukrainians, and in order to have a certain incentive for the present government and president to proceed with reforms, we of course expect that there could be and should be certain positive signals on behalf of the European Union towards Ukraine. I will stop here, and giving also the possibility for you to speak and to ask questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this comprehensive overview. We'll now open the floor for questions and comments. And since we are streaming this seminar, you would have to have a microphone, so Liv will pass that around. And please identify yourself, and then we'll start from here. But if you introduce yourself before posing the question.
Thank you very much for a very interesting and informative presentation. My name is Jakub Godzimirski. I am research professor at this institute, and I would like to ask you two questions. Being in Norway, you are perfectly aware of the fact that last year Norway has signed an agreement on supply of some Norwegian gas to Ukraine. And how do you see the kind of future of this energy cooperation between Norway and Ukraine? One of the strategic issues that you have to address is the issue of your energy dependence on Russia, and also one of the solutions that can be proposed is the issue of improvement of energy efficiency of your economy. What role for Norway you see in this context? And the second question goes to the fact that although you are not a member of the European Union, you have hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian citizens, former Ukrainian citizens living abroad, many of them also in the European Union, but also you have a huge Ukrainian diaspora in countries like Canada. Do you think about using this human capital to help you deal with all those practical and strategic issues you have to solve at the current stage of development?
Thank you for your questions, especially about energy and gas supply, because I actually missed it in my introduction, but this is a very important topic, and especially in our relations with the Russian Federation. This year, this winter, we came, I think, successfully, because we were in a possibility actually to substitute Russian gas as much as possible. So out of 100%, we used Russian gas only for 40%. So 60%, this was the supplies from the reverse flows from Slovakia, Poland, and Hungary, and also our own gas of our national production. And of course, God gave us a very soft winter. So we were also capable to the mixture of these conditions. We were able to overcome winter. And of course, we will be proceeding with this course aimed at giving up with this connection and full dependence on gas with the Russian Federation. Because now we do see the price, and we are not in a position to pay this price anymore, because the gas in Ukrainian-Russian relations was never an economic affair. That was always a political leverage. And these problems always with contracts, with gas, with this formula take or buy, take or pay, all these were really very discriminatory contracts for Ukraine. So the idea is also to come up with energy efficiency. To be frank with you, for many years of new history of Ukraine, that was not the point. Many enterprises, especially on the east, they were using cheap Russian gas. So that was not a point, to to pay money in order to have a special energy efficiency technologies and the equipment. For what reason? Our men were thinking about having benefits in a very good speed. But now we are forced to make it. So energy efficiency is also on the agenda. And as you mentioned, Statoil, I do believe that this is a very prospective cooperation and that it can be, of course, we started with a contract on supply only 1 billion cubic meters, but I think this is only the beginning. Again, our consumption earlier was in a year was about 40 billion. And I'm not an energy expert, but I was told by many of my colleagues that this is so energy inefficient that it is absolutely irresponsible attitude towards energy and gas consumption. So also this year, with the help of the population, we were trying to save as much as possible. And you know, just only thanks to the population, we saved 1 billion cubic meters. I think this is also a very good start. And you mentioned about the possibilities of Ukrainian communities abroad. I should tell you that we are already using it, our possibilities of our communities. I think that they are even more proactive than some of the civil servants in Ukraine, because they started abroad accumulating, for example, humanitarian aid for the soldiers on the east. They are very active with also helping soldiers which were wounded, and now they are in the hospitals in different cities of Ukraine. So I was, for example, in London just recently, and I met with representatives of our diaspora. And I was really positively astonished how proactive these people are. So they're thinking about Ukraine and what they can do for Ukraine every day. That was a special, my thanks and for this patriotic feeling. And I know that representatives of our communities, they are also organizing public events, political demonstrations abroad in the city centers, also to show support to Ukraine and also to show their attitude towards Russian annexation.
Thank you. Then we'll move to Geir.
Thank you so much, Ms. Galibarenko. My name is Geir Flikke, Associate Professor at the University of Oslo. I used to work at this institute before. I find myself sharing most of your views when you describe what the director of this institute called the Annus Horribilis 2014 of European security. And I have two questions for you. First, taking into account what you described as Poroshenko's law package to the Rada on the implementation of regional elections in the eastern parts of Ukraine in accordance with the Minsk II protocol. What is, in your view, the most important challenge in implementing that? And how do you see a way in which the international community can facilitate the implementation of these elections? And secondly, and this is due to my biography as a researcher, I noticed that Ukraine is now a member of Horizon 2020 of the European Union. This is a huge research cooperation project where you are actually on the same footing as Norway and Turkey and other countries. So what is your vision for extended research cooperation? And of course, a very leading question, would you like to see extended research cooperation also with Norway?
My even general remark before I will be responding to your question is that we are ready for extending cooperation with Norway in all spheres. And frankly speaking, I mean, as I was told by my colleagues in the embassy, that Norwegians, they are frequently saying that we are a small country, but I am adding a small country with their own oil, gas, and so brave behavior, because you are among actually the most active supporters of Ukraine, and that is my special gratitude. As to the Minsk II and implementation of this law on this so-called special status, I do believe that it can be implemented only, as I mentioned, if we will be having free and fair elections. How to do this? Of course, with the support of the OSCE, because they are having special experience, expertise, and facilities how to do this. Our point is that local elections should not be serving for legitimizing separatists, just only to have these bandits like Zakharchenko, Platnitsky sitting together with us at one table and just dictating us what to do. That will not go. And you know that when we debated this law in the parliament, there were also many doubts whether we will be able to implement. But this is like a two-way street. It can be implemented if there would be a good political will on both sides. Whether I believe that there is a goodwill on the Russian side, no. Because they reacted, I think, within 2 hours after the law was passed in the parliament. And their reaction was, it is not like stipulated in the Minsk deal, and this is not enough. And separatists were also starting to say that it should be unconditionally. But, you know, Minsk II is conditional in all of its provisions. Because control over border, which is crucial, as I mentioned, to the resolution of this conflict, is also very conditional. It is stipulated that it can be exercised by Ukraine by the end of the year, if the political conditions will be there, if the constitutional reform will be made and the local elections will be held. Of course, this is also strictly conditional. But again, this is a two-way street, this is a compromise, and everyone should deliver. As Horizon 2020 is concerned, I think that this is really a small but tangible success for us, because our Ministry of Education was really striving to have a new opportunities for enhancing education, research, science exchanges, and special possibility to obtain grants from the European Union within this program. The positive gesture on behalf of the EU was that we were granted a special discount for the time of financial constraints in Ukraine, which will be paying like a members. I think that this is also a really good opportunity. Of course, we will see in the future. We will be trying, of course, to be capable to present ourselves within this program and to have like an added value from implementing it.
Thank you. We'll move on.
Thank you, Ms. Galibarenko. My name is Kåre Hauge. I'm a former Norwegian diplomat. And I thank you especially for your analysis of Minsk II. Those of us who have read it know very well that particularly paragraph 11 is such that almost no matter what you do, the Russians can say that we are not satisfied. And they said so within the same day, practically, on Planeta when you watch their TV. My question has to do with another war, not the one in eastern Ukraine, but the propaganda war. 2 days ago, one of our most experienced journalists in the biggest Norwegian newspaper wrote an article which pointed out some of the difficulties that a Western audience has when it is confronted with different views on a specific matter, like the war in eastern Ukraine. We are used to having views from the left and views from the right, and then the general citizen says that, well, the truth is somewhere in the middle. But when you have views from one side being pure lies and views from the other being at least closer to the truth, in the middle there is no position really, because one of the views presented is what is usually called propaganda. And my question to you is, when you know that the Russian side has what is called opinion factories working on the internet, for instance, in St. Petersburg, putting out, for instance, statements that your prime minister has called Russians Untermensch in German, Neludi, which is not really a translation of Untermensch. It's not as bad as that. It's bad enough, but it's not Untermensch. What are you actually doing in order to counter this propaganda? Because as we know from World War II and slightly before, if you repeat that kind of information often enough, somebody's bound to believe it sooner or later. Thank you.
Just before you start, I have now Tone Ran and Irina Sabur, and please indicate if you want to ask a question or address a question to Ms. Galibarenko. Please. Yes.
So you are right, absolutely right, that Russia is investing a big amount of money and, of course, many efforts in order to not even to discredit Ukraine, as I put it like this. They are like creating a new parallel reality for the Russians. They describe, for example, that we are eating people and children on the streets, which is absolutely ridiculous. But, you know, this lie is so ridiculous and so enormous that it is not even possible for ordinary people to imagine that this is not true. And from this perception goes what you mentioned about the truth is somewhere in the middle, because it is so enormous and so unbelievable not to even imagine such a big lie. What we are doing, I think that we are not even countering Russian propaganda because we are just telling the truth. So that's why we are not inventing something new, or we are not trying to amend and to change the Russian reality which they are describing. We are just telling the truth through our diplomats, through our communities, through also foreign delegations who are coming to Ukraine. We are just also showing them Odessa, Dnipropetrovsk, Kharkiv, many cities, not only Kiev. And this is the best evidence of what is going on. And then all this trash about like Kiev junta, or this is that we are like, I don't know, neludi, as you mentioned, not human beings. This is, of course, so evident that this is not true. So again, we are not countering propaganda. We are just telling the truth. And in this point, we are much stronger. Because when you are telling the truth, you are not afraid of being exposed to something. We recognize our mistakes if we are doing them, or we recognize that the length and the speed of reform is not as it is desired. But this is, of course, have reasons behind this. But you know, when I was meeting with my European colleagues, even last year, we were discussing that there should be, of course, something, for example, foreign channel, which will be broadcasting in Russian. But this channel will be telling the truth, not the truth which is presented, for example, by Live News or Russia Today. Why in Russian? Because especially in the Eastern Europe, there are so many people living who are speaking Russian. And of course, they are following Russian-speaking channels. And on this field, there should be an alternative vision of what is going on. So I am glad that this idea actually was supported by the European Union, because some of the European countries, they suggested to the European Union and High Representative Federica Mogherini to look at the possibility of creating a special channel which will be supported and financing by the European Union, and will be presenting alternative Russian anti-propaganda view. I hope that the EU will speed up the process of establishing such a channel. In Ukraine, we created in turn a very tiny and modest, small ministry, which is headed by a very prominent journalist who was actually established the 5th channel, which is so popular in Ukraine. It was broadcasting Maidan, despite that the government was trying to switch them off. And now he's at the top of this ministry, and he's also trying to have a special, also our reaction to the fake that the Russians are trying to spread. They are not bureaucrats, and I think this is really good. They are trying to proceed from their journalist past, and also to present via internet, via different TV show, also to present what is going on.
My name is Tone Rand, Deputy Minister. Thank you very much for your most interesting presentation of a very complex situation. I have two questions for you. The first one pertaining to your views on the future relationship between Ukraine and the EU and NATO. And then an even more sensitive question. Do you consider that there is a certain likelihood that the Russians might use the same aggressive methods against other neighbors in the interest sphere, such as, for example, the Baltic states? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. As I mentioned, European integration is an absolute priority for the government and for this country. Of course, we do understand that this is not actually only about positive signals from Brussels, but this is about internal reforms. It will take years, of course, and years of very hard work of reforming country, and this is also obvious, but we are going forward by this way, and our guide is, of course, association agreement. We have already started implementing political part, and starting from the 1st of January 2016, we will be implementing the CFTA part. As NATO is concerned, as maybe you know, maybe not, that we recently, the parliament abandoned the so-called non-block status of Ukraine, and we stipulated that we will be continuing strategic cooperation with NATO. What does it mean? Behind is the rationale that the NATO membership is not on the agenda now. This is obvious. However, the public support for possible NATO membership increased from 20% before Russian annexation till almost 60% now. So the increase in support for cooperation with NATO is enormous within the public. But again, membership as itself is not on the agenda, but we will be trying to enhance our cooperation based on the special action plan. This is annual action plan between Ukraine and NATO, and we are trying to introduce NATO standards in our also military and technical sphere. And we also will be proceeding with very close political discussions on the security situation, exchanging of expertise, and also having a special joint trainings with NATO. And you also asked about
Baltic countries.
No, it's very hard and challenging task, you know, to say to you what would be the desire and logic of the President Putin in the future, because it is simple that it was not possible to imagine, I can assure you, before these events last year, that Russia will ever invade Ukraine. We were really thinking, politicians, civil society, people, we were thinking that we would be like together or very close forever. And even some of my colleagues, they were telling me that the fact that the Black Sea Fleet is stationing on the Crimean Peninsula is the guarantee of security for Ukraine. So let's call it, if you would like, blindness. Yes, we were blinded enough to believe that they will be not staying against and opposing against European integration of Ukraine. Because all these years, Russians were telling us that they are not against European integration of Ukraine, and they are not against association agreement. But when we actually reach the point that will be able to sign, so everything started just in the opposite direction. So again, it's not a very lucky mission, to predict. I wish that he would be like limiting himself only blackmailing West or making some empty threats. Let's hope that it would be like that. But again, these military activities and this penetrating by their planes of the airspace of the Baltic states, it's not a very promising signal, I'm afraid.
I hope we're not wearing you totally out with all our curiosity, but we have still a few more questions. And next one.
My name is Irina Sabor, and I'm responsible for educational projects at the European Wergeland Center in Oslo. And my question would be about the relations between the government and the civil society actors in Ukraine. As Geir Flikke mentioned, there are many positive results in the field of research cooperation, and we see also that the Minister of Education of Ukraine has done a lot in reforming the higher education. They are now launched the secondary education changes, many experts say that this is just due to the fact of their close cooperation with civil society. And we see also a positive example of cooperation between the Ministry of Defense and volunteers. What, in your opinion, what is the perspective of such a close cooperation? Because on the other hand, we see also some volunteers are taking over some of the key state functions, and they sometimes duplicate themselves, and they work chaotically or non-coordinated. What do you think? What is the perspective of this cooperation? Is it positive as we see it, or can it be seen as negative? Thank you.
I would prefer to call it that it was this cooperation between volunteers and some ministers. It was some kind of chaotic character, but it was in the beginning. Now it is going to more proper understanding of all parties, what they are doing, and how not to actually oppose to each other, how to cooperate. And that's why I also applaud to the Ministry of Defense, because they introduced a very good practice. They are engaging representatives of volunteers into their procedures, for example, when they are having a special tender on weapon or equipment or food for soldiers. So volunteers and their representatives, they participate in these tenders. They also express their opinions, how to simplify this or that procedure, because this is not a secret. Again, as I mentioned, Army, Ministry of Defense were badly financed, badly qualified, and the most bad thing is that they were filled with Russian spies. That's why when the war came to our house, we were not prepared, and that's why the ministry was a little bit bulky in the beginning, and they were not capable to do certain things with a good speed and very rapidly. And the volunteers, they were more progressive on that. So now they are like exchanging their best practices, and I hope that they will be cooperating even more close in the future.
Mm-hmm. Next question will be from my colleague Roman.
My name is Roman Vakulchuk. I'm a senior researcher here at NUPI, and I have two questions to you. You mentioned several times the association agreement between Ukraine and the EU. And so my question is, well, as you said, the economic part of the agreement has been postponed till next year. But still, I wonder whether some initial work has been already done and also some preparatory work. And we know that the association agreement itself has more than 70 different areas of cooperation between the EU and the new member. So my question then is, which areas have been identified so far by the Ukrainian government, and also which areas are seen as being sort of the priority areas from the European side? Because it's understandable that it's difficult to work on 70 areas at the same time. So I wonder what are the priorities within this economic dimension of cooperation. My second question relates to the important issue of introducing electronic government, as you rightly said. So I wonder also how the process now is being organized and what are the key challenges and also perspectives in terms of introducing the e-government, which in turn is also an integral part of the association agreement. Thank you.
You know, I will not put it like we have any priorities to be identified in the association agreement. It's a wrong perception, let me put it frankly. We are implementing now political part, the part which is dedicated to the justice and home affairs, the part which is also partly dedicated to the cooperation, for example, in transport, in ecology sphere. So everything without DCFTA part. So what we actually done, we have certain provisions, but many of them of the general character in the association agreement. We elaborated a special implementation plan. And this implementation plan covers different spheres, but not with exact priorities. We are looking actually at the time frame, because certain directives of the European Union should be implemented already this year or the next year. So this is our priority. And this implementation process has already begun according to this implementation plan. So I will put it like this, and we also established a special office within the government, and this office is charged with actually supervising how the implementation plan is proceeding, and they are also making recommendations how to do this work better. And also one announcement, actually not directly connected with the European Association Agreement, but with the idea of financial expertise, humanitarian support to Ukraine, and this will be the international conference called in support of Ukraine. That was the idea already announced last year. So now we elaborated a general concept of the conference. It would be held after the next day after the Ukraine-EU summit. So on the 28th of April, we will be hosting in Kiev a special international conference. The idea is dual. So the first goal is to present what we are doing in reforming the country, ideas, results already, and plans, concrete plans and anticipation indicators for the future. And the second idea is also to discuss with the international donors how they can help and assist Ukraine. The idea is to have also a special panel session dedicated only to restoring Donbass. So as it is, we will be not requesting money, because we see that international assistance has been already accumulated in this loan of the International Monetary Fund. But we would be outlining plans of future assistance, also including assistance at the level of sending a special expertise and advisors to Ukraine, how to implement this or that sphere. Because we already have a good record, I should say. Representatives of Western countries are working already in several ministries of Ukraine. We have in the Ministry of Energy, Ministry of Defense, in the National Bank, Ministry of Economy. We have experts and advisors who are advising the leadership of the ministry how to reform that of this sphere and how to tackle with the recent challenges. So the idea is also to be as close as possible and also to hear to these experts, I would call it, to increase the Ukraine absorption capacity.
Okay, I promised Ms. Galibarenko, because she has a very tight program here in Oslo, that we'll try to wrap up a little bit early. So in the interest of time, I think we'll take 2 and 2 questions now. I have 4 more on my list. Next is the Russian Embassy.
Yes, hi, Dmitry Butorin, attaché of the Russian Embassy in Oslo. Deputy Minister, could you be so kind to provide any comment on the ongoing conflict between President Poroshenko and the governor of Dnipropetrovsk region, Mr. Kolomoisky, who is one of the most influential people in Ukraine, magnate. What, in your opinion, could be possible further implications of this conflict on the future of Ukraine? Thank you.
I will add one more question. If you will pass the microphone to Arnfinn.
A little different question from me. Arnfinn Aabø, project manager in the Norwegian Ukrainian Chamber of Commerce. We are having a networking meeting the 16th of April in Oslo at Vikborg Rein, by the way, the company that assists Naftogaz in the Stockholm Arbitration Court against Gazprom. At 12 o'clock, you're all welcome. You can register at nucc.no. And the topic will be possibilities and limitations for Norwegian businesses under the EFTA-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement. And as we know, the EU reduced some import duties, tariffs on agricultural products for Ukraine, and also some duty-free quotas for Ukraine on some products. Norway did not do this. And we have a bilateral agreement between Norway and Ukraine on agricultural products. And the Norwegian Ukrainian Chamber of Commerce has taken an initiative to amend or revise this agreement to make it more well, to support Ukraine, to open more possibilities for Ukraine, because some of the main products are not included in this agreement, as for example grain, sunflower, etc. So maybe it's another leading question, but would you support this initiative, or how would you look at this to revise this agricultural agreement? So as in our opinion, it would be a good way to support Ukraine by stimulating import from Ukraine, not only by giving direct money, but also to stimulate trade. It's maybe an even better way to support Ukraine through actual actions like this. And maybe you have some other opinion about increasing Norwegian-Ukrainian trade, how we can assist that. Thank you very much.
So I will start responding about the conflict which emerged last week in Kiev. It was about the struggle which one of our oligarchs, Mr. Kolomoisky, was doing in order to secure his control over the state enterprise. And I think that first reaction is about implications. Implications are there. He was fired by the president because he was head of the Dnipropetrovsk region administration. He was fired. And I think that his deputies made the same, but already voluntarily. The signal and the reason behind that conflict is actually rather simple and very good for the country perspective. I will explain why. Because what actually in the middle, the Parliament of Ukraine passed special amendments to the law specifying the limitation for Mr. Kolomoisky over his control over the state enterprise Ukrtransnafta. He perceived it very aggressively, I should tell you, and reacted in a way that with the military people, he actually seized the building of Ukrtransnafta. So, but as I mentioned, good signal for this country. Good signal is that we are applying and we are endorsing general rules for everybody. So for oligarchs means that they should give up with their past practices. Then they were able, through their influence, through people, through bribes, to get on with their business, to have state contracts, to penetrate into the leadership of the state enterprises. And they should become a true European businessman. So if you are having problems with the state policy, if you are contesting something, if you are not agree, you should come to trial and contest the decision of the government, of the parliament, of the president. But it would not be allowed, and it was a clear signal of our president, that the oligarchs will be having their own small armies, that they will be given the possibilities to seize state enterprises and to dictate their conditions. That is not a good practice. And if we are to be a European country, we should put an end to this. About EFTA and agriculture, so maybe my answer will be that I will give a possibility to my colleagues from respective ministers to decide. As far as I know, just recently our Minister of Agriculture was visiting Norway, and I suppose he had very productive negotiations. I was hoping actually that we are not having restrictions in our trade because of EFTA agreement, but maybe this workshop that you will be having that will give a fresh glance on it. I would appreciate maybe if you will be inviting somebody from Ukraine, from the respective ministry, to also to present to you the view.
Then we'll have the two final questions.
Thank you so much for your time and your openness answering the questions. My name is Olga Shamshir-Flydal. I work as advisor at the Norwegian Helsinki Committee. My question goes to the internally displaced people in Ukraine. We now know that even the official numbers are climbing up to 1 million, and officially it might be 1.5 million people. It's quite a large amount of people to be displaced. And it is our understanding that in many cases they face the same prejudices as migrants were earlier facing, especially in Ukraine, especially those coming from the east, because they do not speak the language, they're taking the jobs and driving up the real estate prices and so on. So what is the government's strategy, long-term strategy, for all the IDPs, and your plan for easing the social tensions and also the pressure on the infrastructure, that especially in the big cities, which has taken the most amount of IDPs? Thank you.
And the final question is from Henrik.
Good afternoon, Deputy Minister. I'm Henrik Seip of the Eastern Europe Group consultancy. My question is about Ukraine's economic predicament. Only today there were bad news from Moody's, and of course reforms are badly needed. My question would be whether you think Ukraine will be able to reform as long as most business in the country remains firmly in oligarch hands. Thank you.
So as to the response to the first question, my first point is that there has never been any discrimination because of Russian language in Ukraine. It's ridiculous to say like that. Because even if you will be in Kiev, you will see that the majority of people are speaking Russian, not Ukrainian. And I don't see any discrimination because of that. I have my neighbors on my floor where I am living. They came, they were forced to give up their home in Lugansk. And I can assure you that these people, their main message, as we exchanged briefly in the elevator, was that if they will know how much despair, disorder, and war these separatists and Russians will bring them, they will be taking the streets every day, then everything was started. But you know, the problem is that people, they were thinking that there will be nothing out of it. Just a few demonstrations, and everything will go as always, as usual. But it's not now as usual. But again, I admit that there is, of course, a huge challenge with internally displaced persons in Ukraine, and I'm absolutely sure that it would be the same challenge to any country. Even the most well-being and the most wealthy and healthy. Because we are having 1,200,000 refugees now. And the majority of them want place where to live. They need job. They have small children. So all of them have needs as a social protection, social financing. And as I described in the beginning, we don't have this money, obviously. what we are trying to do, of course, we are trying to reallocate our own money, trying to have humanitarian financial support from international organizations, especially who are dealing with such a humanitarian crisis. For example, UN Refugee Office, Council of Europe is also helping bilateral countries. Countries at the bilateral level are helping. But of course the problem is there, and it will not disappear. I was discussing the same with Georgians, and they told me that so many years after the Georgian war, the problem of internally displaced persons still exists, and this is still acute. That is the problem. So it will not like disappear in the air. Of course, people who were more wealthy and more young and well qualified, they are already settled in Ukraine, in many cities, in Kyiv, in Kharkiv, in Dnipropetrovsk, Lviv. The problem is with elder people and also with mothers, with children without any husband to support and sustain them. These people actually need state support, and again, we will be doing our best, of course, in order to support these people.
The final question about the economy.
About economy, yeah. There is maybe not much that I could add what I already said about situation in economy. We do not expect any increase or any economic welfare during this year and even in the forthcoming years. I'm afraid even that the next year will be even more difficult for Ukraine than this one. But if we will be implementing austerity measures, if we will be strong enough in order to implement demands of the International Monetary Fund to fulfill commitments, I think that these years they will be coming as a ground for maybe future stabilizing economy. The bad signal is that the national currency dropped 3 times. And this also increased inflation, prices, and also uncertainty in the banking system. So this is altogether a mix of challenges, and we are to respond to them simultaneously. Maybe partially a key could be anti-corruption. If we would be sufficient enough in handling anti-corruption measures, I will expect that even despite war and this obvious fear of war, there could be inflow of investment, especially in the situation when Europe is also looking for new markets for its goods because of Russian retaliatory measures. It can be also an option.
Then I would once again thank Ms. Galibarenko for taking the time for giving this public lecture today, and for this comprehensive overview, and not least for patiently answering all our questions. So I would like to ask you all to join me in a big hand, give a big hand. Thank you very much.